we've covered this terrain, and we're going to revisit and go back a little bit deeper, and I want you to go a little bit more into this practice because it is so useful to understand these chains of activity, muscular activity in the system, and how they relate to breathing. So the first thing to remember is that diaphragm, the big muscle that sits on the inside borders of these ribs here, underneath here, this diaphragm goes all the way around the back, and the back legs of the diaphragm feed down the inside of the spine. That diaphragm is fascially connected into the muscles of the belly, muscles of the inside of the back, and all the way down into the pelvic floor. Now, when the diaphragm, the muscles contract and pull the tendinous part of the diaphragm, flattening it out like this, in a relaxed breath, that pushes the belly out and the pelvic floor down. So like I said earlier, we've got this reciprocal dance going on of the diaphragm and the pelvic floor like this with every single breath. Of course, we can change that and we can work with that. So when we come to squatting, if we come into our feet and come up to standing, we tend to come up to standing on an inhale, and as we lift up, the pelvic floor lifts to enable us to lift up through the front line, like we found out earlier on when we were doing some of the vagal tone practice, and before that we were looking at how we can activate the pelvic floor with the inhale, and that lifts the front line of the body. So it's that same effect that is connected to it when we come up into squatting. So what we're going to do now is the 3 waves on the pelvic floor, revisit that first of all. So we can access with our mind 3 different areas of the pelvic floor and activate the muscles and relax them in the pelvic floor. Now, the one thing that seems to block people in this is shame. And again, we have lived in a religious-oriented culture for a couple of thousand years, where the religions seem to believe that the pelvic floor is almost illegal. So, the names of the anatomy, the pubic bone and the pubic hair and this kind of thing is named after the Latin for shame. The name of the bone, the pubic bone in Germany, is the Schambein, the bone of shame. So, to all you Germans out there, when I do teach in Germany, I call it the Glückseligkeitbein, the bliss bone. So we've got to look at our own anatomy, and culture has created this area where we're kind of not allowed to go with our minds. So we're going to go there, we're going to dive deep, and that's what we're doing, and encourage people to go there, encourage people to liberate themselves from shame. Shame is toxic, it destroys creativity, it destroys our healthy creative expressions in the world because we're too kind of like scared, frightened, worried, concerned to put them out into the world. So it's a cramp on human existence. So anyway, let's get rid of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to breathe in, and as you breathe in, you're going to squeeze up and find the anal triangle in the pelvic floor, the back triangle musculature in the pelvic floor, and you can get 2 feelings there. Remember, you can get the squeeze and the lift. So we're going to squeeze and lift on the inhale, and then pulse it, pulse, 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 and then release on the exhale. Do that 3 times. So that's squeeze, lift on the inhale, pulse, 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 release on the exhale. Squeeze and lift on the inhale, and release on the exhale. Of course, you could do it the other way around as well. Yeah? Squeeze and lift on the exhale, and release on the inhale, which then is going to go down with the diaphragm flattening down. So you can do that contrary and synergistic experience where you're working with both together like that, okay, with the breath. The next area of the pelvic floor to come to is the central tendon, the perineal tendon. That's much harder to find. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Come forward to the urogenital triangle, the front of the pelvic floor. Yeah? Men and women have very similar musculature underneath the appearance of the organs. The muscles are they're the same, in fact, pretty much. Except women have that pocket of musculature going up into the vagina, of course, which gives you a much more deep internal experience. So you can really utilize that as a woman. And in some of the yogic tantric literature, it talks about women having the advantage of that deeper level of awareness in the body, which is probably very real. So, from there, we're going to be breathing in on the in-breath first floor, squeeze and lift the front and middle of the pelvic floor. Squeeze, lift, squeeze, lift, squeeze, lift, and pulse on the inhale. And then release on the exhale. Let's do 3 times like that. Squeeze, lift, pulse, and release. And again, squeeze and lift, pulse, release. And again, if you want to take that internally, if you can, take as much internally as you can. Men can too, it's much harder, that's all. It's not at the same level of awareness. And release. Excellent. So you've got the back and the front. And then into the central area, and see if you can find that central area. And what most people usually find to begin with is that it squeezes up the back, the front of the back part and the back of the front part. But that's okay, that's on track. So get that feeling there. It's quite subtle in the perineal tendon. Squeeze, lift, 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 and release on the exhale. That's 2. And 3. Great. So I'm going to do the same practice now, except this time lifting on the exhale and releasing on the inhale. So breathing out, lift the back triangle of the pelvic floor, pulse, 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 release on the inhale. And central area, lift on the exhale, release on the inhale. And the front triangle, lift on the exhale, pulse, 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 release on the inhale. So we've got access to both those ways of working the pelvic floor. You've got access to the 3 areas of the pelvic floor from back to front, front to back. So we're going to join it all together into the 3-wave breath complete. So that's going to be breathing in, lift of back, middle, front, breathing out, release front, middle, back. Breathing in, lift back, middle, front, pulse, pulse, breathing out, release, release, release. You can also do it the other way, from the front to the back. So you can squeeze on the front, breathing in, middle, back, and then release back, middle, front. Breathing in, lift, front, middle, back, breathing out, release, back, middle, and front. You could also do it on the out-breath. Yeah? So lifting on the out-breath, front, middle, back, release on the in-breath, back, middle, front. Great. You could also do it the other way around. Yeah? On the out-breath, lift the back, middle, and then the front, and then release on the inhale. It's got a lot of access to the gymnastics of the pelvic floor in that way. And that is going to be very helpful and insightful in a whole range of ways in terms of your sexual health, in terms of your sexual well-being, in terms of lovemaking, and in terms of general health and well-being and awareness. A lot of men and women get issues with prolapses and all sorts of issues around pelvic health, and some of that is almost certainly to do with a lack of awareness, lack of sensitivity, lack of control, and an overly damaging degree of shame in those areas of the body. So the next practice we're going to now on the pelvic floor is lifting unilaterally on one side. So see if you can come in and feel the left side of the pelvic floor and just squeeze and lift the left side and pulse it and then release it. And then the other side, squeeze up the opposite side, the right side. Squeeze, lift, lift, pulse, 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 release. And go from side to side like that. And again, you can lift on the inhale, you can lift on the exhale, and you can play with that. This is really, really useful practice to do in terms of how it informs deeper levels of breath awareness later on when we're doing alternate nostril breathing, when we're doing different breath practices. Okay. Now, a little bit more forward on the pelvic floor. We've talked about the reciprocal dance of the diaphragm and the pelvic floor. Now, if we initiate an in-breath, like we did in the supercoherent breath, with the pelvic floor lifting slightly, then what's going to happen is that's going to increase the pressure in the abdomen as you're breathing in, and that, when the diaphragm is matching that, squashing down, it's going to switch on different muscles. It stops the diaphragm pushing any further down to the abdomen. Yeah? It switches on the scalenes in the throat to stabilize the upper ribs, and then it engages the external intercostals. So what we find here is if I do that, if I just do an abdominal breath, these ribs don't move much. If I lift the pelvic floor at the initiation of the in-breath, then what happens here is these ribs start to move because they get switched on when that pressure is matched. And we get the lifting quality of the breath through the lungs. Now again, in yogic practice, one of the elements of conscious breath work is playing with the qualities of ground and lift, up and down in the body. So it's not just about carbon dioxide levels, it's not just about oxygenation, it's also about the feeling of life energy flow with gravity and against gravity. And what we can do here when we're working with the pelvic floor in that is give us a foundation from which really to initiate that expansive lifting quality of breath. Right? So that's partly why the pelvic floor is so important with breath work. So that's a little piece on the pelvic floor for you to take away and practice and to work with and to share out into the world. Thank you.